Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 24th Annual SF Indie Fest, where we kind of try to bring some of the most interesting and eclectic films from around the world. Today, we're lucky enough to have actually a local filmmaking team with kind of a really great story. You've just seen the documentary, The Creative High, and we're lucky enough to have the director, Adriana Marcion. Thanks again for being here. And Diane Griffin. Thanks again.
Thanks, Chris.
Producer.
So good to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Yeah, well, the story that you explore in the documentary isn't one that we often kind of associate with kind of, ease in the sense of with kind of addiction and recovery. What was the kind of catalyst that you wanted to go down this rabbit hole of kind of telling this story, and how did you kind of find all the different people that whose stories you told?
Yeah, I'll start that out. It's really wonderful to be here and just to be able to be premiere at this local San Francisco festival. And I started the project out of my own desire to really approach the topic of addiction and creativity, which is I'm an artist in recovery myself. I've been in recovery for 28 years. And I also have specialized in my work. I'm an arts therapist as well. And so I have specialized in recovery for about 20 years. And I just wanted to approach this topic through a film. And this is my second film. And there was just I have so much passion for this topic. And I felt like being able to bring it out through talking to different artists from many different perspectives would just have not only an appeal to bring it to this level of like, how do we think about the everyday artist, or how do we think it's not just the celebrity story? And so that's what originally inspired me. And I could talk about the individual artists and how I found them, but that's to begin. And then Diane came in with me a little bit after the project began, and kind of from her perspective, I felt like she was the perfect person, and she's just brought it to a whole new level to have Diane be a part of this and help the stories come alive.
Thank you, Adriana. I think, what influenced me to work on the project was Adriana's enthusiasm, and her relationship to the artists. She was in contact with them, and most of them live in the Bay Area, so we felt very connected to them. And the one particular person that we didn't have a couple of them, one of them lived in Santa Cruz. We came up with the creative solution of sending him a cell phone. And then, so his, diary-like entries. So we did a lot of things like this that enrich the story. But I want to kind of go back to the idea of why I wanted to be involved in the film. I started studying deeper. I practice Buddhism, the relationship of creativity and Buddhism, and how art can take you to deeper states of who you are. And some of those states don't have words, they're just emotional feelings. They're feelings without words. And so I started being drawn more and more to explore that. And then this project came up. So is it a mistake? I think not. Just the spontaneity too, that creativity can offer you. There's all these things around us, but often, we can't hear it or we don't have time. So I felt very lucky to be involved with this project and getting to know everyone and getting to know myself through this whole process. It's not only the artists we're looking at ourselves looking at them,
I think that's a good way to capture it, because the thing that I kind of took away from the film was like, it wasn't so much this voyeur that I was, just kind of like observing people in these stories. That definitely it was kind of reflecting back, and there's kind of a joy in the way that folks are appreciating life, and I think that's very contagious, of not saying that, hey, I want to live my life exactly like them, right? But at the same time, to find your own, kind of personal joy. And so, as, filmmakers, how did you kind of want to approach that kind of visually, in the sense of like, you know, documenting creative processes isn't always easy. And like, how do you kind of like capture that feeling when you're there in person, you know, on film? And how did you kind of approach each kind of character's kind of perspective so that you could reflect back their experience?
Well, I just want to just jump in too, because I realized all of a sudden I was like, you know, it's so exciting, and I'm also nervous. But one of the things I just want to mention about the previous question is that I felt, as an artist in recovery, when I came to recovery, I felt that there wasn't a map for me to figure out how to be creative when I was sober. It was such a different experience. And I think that was a driving force, because I feel like so many people have this link. Of course, this is I mean, it's a long-standing thing about people who are addicted, you know, whether it's to drugs or alcohol, et cetera, that the creative force sometimes comes through that drug or alcohol, and through that high, right? So for me, it really was about how do we explore that from a different vantage point. And in terms of visually, I mean, God, there's so much to say about that. It's a great question. And I think that technically there was a lot of different things, and Diane brought a lot of influence, because she's been involved with documentary and film for a long time, even though I am a visual artist and I've dabbled in film and photography as my love as well. But some of it, you know, is, I think, just telling the stories and approaching it from a very creative perspective. Like all along, I felt like we just need to see the artists in action. We need to see them singing and dancing and making visual art. And that was just really key to the process. So
Yeah, and I think too, the other thing is, you know, working in the filmmaking process, you know, there's so much planning that goes on with a lot of films, even documentaries, but we really didn't plan too much for the shoots. We'd kind of show up with our cameras, you know. And we had a DP, one of our DPs is like, well, what's the plan? And I'm like, we would be like, well, let's just show up and see what unfolds, you know. And then, you know, it was in some ways, you know, should we have planned more? Well, that just wasn't what we wanted to do. You know, we wanted it to be really in that moment. Of course, we planned the cameras where we were going to shoot. And, you know, there were chances that we could get kicked out of some of these locations because getting permits, we just, you know, anyway, we won't go too deeply into that subject, but and, you know, like, for instance, also, you know, these visuals of San Francisco with these drone shots, we wanted the story to be a larger landscape, you know, a larger landscape of our lives. And, you know, showing that through those drone shots, giving our audience a rest from some of the dense stories, you know, it's a lot to take in, you know. And we wanted people to have a chance to kind of reflect, or not, just to have some space and silence, you know. And San Francisco is so beautiful, and it's gone through so much during this pandemic. So it's kind of our way to, you know, giving back to the city.
Which I guess, you know, raises two questions, just since you kind of made mention, you know, of the pandemic, Diane. At some point in time, like, you know, as artists that had gone through, you know, or in recovery, were there different kind of challenges, and, you know, kind of as kind of an epilogue for the film, in the sense that, like, were there bigger struggles, I guess? I mean, because as creative people or artists, you know, you know, it's, you know, this expression, or at least you're even sharing it with the world, right? How have folks done during these kind of difficult times, and do they have any kind of unusual struggles that they didn't expect with their recovery because of it?
Well, I mean, it was a 6-year process of following the artists. So obviously we saw them through lots of different phases, and some of them moved and during the pandemic. And like Peter, for instance, moved, I think he moved right before. Lessa moved during the pandemic to Florida. I think things were getting difficult for her here for a variety of reasons. But most of our filming was done before the pandemic hit. I mean, we were really heading, it was all kind of post-production. So yeah, so really what you see is all pre-pandemic. So
well, there's a lot. Oh, yeah, but I wanted to bring up something too, Adriana, is that, you know, some of our artists thought that we might not finish the film, and so
Yeah,
So
we didn't know either at times.
they weren't going to be really seen. And then
Yeah.
they started realizing that no, the documentary really was going to be finished. And they were, there's a vulnerability to that, you know, really being open about where you are with, you know, yourself as an addict. And it's brave, I will say. I really admire them because they're not only, you know, they're helping other people out there by being open about their addictive behaviors, and what, you know, and hopefully they're offering, and I think they do in the documentary, it's seen what they do to remain, you know, in their bodies, in their lives, by not acting out on their addiction.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, and I have to say just kudos to everybody that we see on screen, because it's not easy, anybody to kind of share their stories, you know.
Right.
And, you know, too often I think sometimes people, you know, cannot be empathetic or, you know, judge. And I just think that you kind of captured the nuance of just being a human being, and let alone human beings that are artists. And so as you were kind of figuring out who to film,
Yeah.
what were some of the kind of parameters that you were, how were you deciding? Is it, you know, one is like, would they be open to being filmed? I mean, was there kind of what sort of art they did or creativity kind of in it? And like, did you just try to also find different people on, I guess, different area at different periods in their recovery? So like, yeah, how did you kind of, I mean, it's a documentary, and so you're having to kind of choose a finite number of stories. So how were these the stories that you decided to kind of focus on?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot there, so I'll try to keep it simple, and you can ask more questions, and Diane can chime in too. So some of the artists I already had a connection to, like Ralph Spite, who is a musician and has a long history of kind of punk music here in the Bay Area. I had known Ralph for a long time. So actually, one of the reasons that he said he even agreed to do it was because he knew me. So if he didn't know me, because he'd been asked to do films about recovery before, and he was like, no way, I'm not doing that. So there was that personal connection. So that helped. And some of the other ones I kind of had known over the years in my recovery. But then a few, like Brandon, our hip hop artist, I just bumped into somebody on the street who was part of a hip hop organization. And I said, I'm trying to find a hip hop artist who's sober. Do you know anybody? And he knew Brandon. And he was like, yeah, this guy Dope was down in Santa Cruz. And I was able to find him on the internet. And so there was some really interesting ways that we got connected to people. Wes Gear, who's the Rock to Recovery guy. Somebody found me on Facebook, saw that I was doing this film. I was like, Wes is all about the creative high. And so there was some cool connections to get the folks in. And then some of the people that I originally brought in, I had interviewed, there was another musician, a woman, a folksy musician. There was a potter, and there was an opera singer. This guy was an opera singer. And some of them either were just reticent. One of them was reticent. They just weren't willing to go there after I started talking with them. It felt too risky. And then the other folks just felt like it wasn't really working when we started filming. It just wasn't fitting. And the other thing is, you know, bringing in diverse perspectives was really important. And so having drag represented and having different ages, like Kathy, who's, you know, she's retired and really doing this work and finding her recovery her art for the first time in recovery. So Diane, anything else you want to chime in with about the art?
Well, sure. And then when we got together, we started, you know, looking at, okay, what are these? We like to call them collaborators rather than subjects, because, you know, we're collaborating. You know, we're making this all together, this documentary. But you know, we wanted to have the voice of women too, women in recovery. You know, I think back to a story in India where women who want to go to meetings are sometimes shamed, and you know, they had encouraged women in recovery, if they traveled to India, to help usher these women into these rooms. I mean, that doesn't happen so much here, but we wanted the voice, the female voice, to be heard in recovery. And so that's why, you know, a third of our people are women. yeah.
So can I ask you a question about that? I hadn't actually thought about that before, but so often we do kind of associate like stories of recovery from basically like the white male perspective, or often the white male perspective, probably in their 40s or 50s or something like that.
Yep.
Why do you think that is? I mean, outside of just obviously there's, just in general, you know, that's the way that so many other stories in the world, or or at least in the United States, are told. But yeah, why do you think often that we don't hear the kind of female perspective of recovery?
That's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought. Well, I think part of it is, internationally, it's sexism. It's maybe women's own inability to, to share that part of their lives openly. I'm not really certain, but that's a great question. I'd like to explore that. Look at that deeper.
Sometimes I think it's almost the male artist has always been, it's sort of a stereotype of the male artist and the revered male artist, right? And as well as then the revered male artist in recovery who, he's gone down the road of destruction and come back. And I mean, we love that story and just in general of the hero's journey. But I definitely felt like I wanted to expand the playing field. And I think that's happening in general in recovery. There's a whole push towards women recovery organizations that are coming up, LGBTQ organizations that and people really wanting to tell that story or have resources for people that that are needing it, that maybe don't feel comfortable in 12-step groups or have just as creative people want to feel like their story is just as important to be seen and heard. So I think it is a great question. I want to keep thinking about like, why is it? But I think it's part of the larger zeitgeist, really.
I think too, though, now that you brought that up, Adriana, that makes sense to me. I mean, women are underrepresented in, in the creative field, or have been. And so, this documentary being about that. Yeah, I mean, I know as a as a female filmmaker, it's been difficult at times, with funding. And I think one thing that COVID has done is it's opened up some monies for that, for people to dispersal of funds. We need it because art is important, especially during COVID.
And I think that's very representative, not just in the film, but also each of the artists that you share, of just the important that kind of arts and creativity have just for the community and also individual sustainability, I guess, in the sense of just in your soul. And so I wouldn't ever label this an issue film, because in the sense the issue is the backdrop with which these different kind of creative collaborators that you showcase experience it. But if somebody were to kind of attend the film and maybe weren't in recovery or were struggling, like what would the thing that you would want them to take away? Or for those that maybe have loved ones that are struggling, what would you is there any kind of guidance that you think that the artists that we see in the film, or either of you, would kind of recommend to them so that they could either support folks or help, or folks could kind of begin their journey if they so chose?
Yeah, I mean, my message really of my work has always been about how art is just fundamentally healing. It's being able to create art, being able to even just witness and go to a show or watch a wonderful film. Like, it does something, it changes us in some way.
Yeah.
And I really feel that's so important. The message of the film to me is art is also a vehicle for recovery, but mental health, mental health, physical health, spiritual health. And so that is what I hope people come away with, and to know that engaging in it and telling your story and finding a way to be creative about it is just incredibly enlivening. And there's so many avenues to do it. There's so many different roads to Rome, shall we say. So that's one of the most important things for me, and is just conveying that message. And yeah.
I also think, art is transformative. It's allowing you to connect to deeper states. And, even if you're using, even viewing art is transformative. I was thinking of this man Glasser, who's, you go to a museum. I think of this writer, Hisham Matar, he went and spent a month in a museum with grief of his father, like sitting in front of a painting. But I think too, when you're in heavy addiction, it's hard to create, it's hard to create and to see that. So I think being curious about, reaching out to support, to support groups, and there's no charge for those. They can also go to our website, thecreativehigh.com, and we have some resources there for them. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Diane and Adriana, thank you again for making this wonderful film and sharing it with us. And so excited to be able to kind of premiere here in the Bay Area. And we'll look forward to kind of spreading joy around. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Thank you,
everyone.
everyone. Bye for now.